when you're driving on like a freshly paved road, or you see them fixing up a bridge that you use all the time, or maybe a new light rail line going in.
Yeah, basic infrastructure, stuff
It,
we rely on.
exactly. And it usually involves a ton of federal money. But what if the folks controlling that money, the executive branch, decided to say, hold on, you only get these funds if you do what we say on something completely different?
Hmm. Like holding infrastructure hostage for an unrelated policy goal.
Precisely. And today we're actually digging into a recent federal court ruling that, well, it struck down exactly that kind of move.
Okay.
So our mission here, based on this analysis of the court decision we've been looking at, is to really unpack what went down, why it's such a big deal, and, what it tells us about the whole checks and balances thing in our government.
It's a classic tension, isn't it?
Mm.
Federal power versus state sovereignty. And this deep dive really highlights the judiciary's role, kind of acting as a referee in these fights.
Okay, let's get into it. So the core of this fight was this directive from the Trump administration. It came specifically from the Transportation Secretary at the time, Secretary Duffy. The source even mentioned his, let's say, unconventional pre-politics background.
Right, yeah. But the directive itself, that was serious business. The condition was pretty stark. States and also what the administration called sanctuary cities, places limiting cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. They had to get on board with the administration's specific view on immigration policy. We're talking about things like implementing deportation law, helping with roundups.
And the money involved wasn't small change, was it?
Not at all. This was the big stuff. Federal dollars for major projects. Communities depend on roads, tunnels, bridges, overpasses, even public transit like light rail, buses, subways.
Oh.
Our source points out it's mainly federal interstate highway program money.
Billions of dollars, basically. Money meant for, like, the arteries of our towns and cities.
Exactly. Billions.
Yeah.
So faced with that kind of pressure, how did the states react?
Well, they didn't just roll over. A whole group of them, 20 states, challenged it in court.
20 states. Wow.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, I think, is who challenged it. It was led by Democratic attorneys general, New Jersey, California, places like that. But the coalition also included states with Republican leaders like Nevada and Vermont.
Okay, so not strictly partisan. That suggests a broader concern about, perhaps, federal overreach.
Seems like it. So what was their main legal argument? How did they frame the challenge?
They argued the Duffy Directive, as it was called, broke several rules. But a key one was the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA.
Okay, the APA, that's the rule book for how federal agencies have to operate, right? Like how they make regulations.
Exactly. The states basically said the administration didn't follow the proper legal steps to impose a condition like this, especially one so, well, disconnected from transportation.
Which brings us to the judge. Judge McConnell, chief judge in Rhode Island. The source notes he's an Obama appointee, but generally seen as a moderate. He's the one who issued the preliminary injunction, basically hitting pause on the directive.
That's right. A preliminary injunction is a big step. It stops the government from enforcing the rule while the case proceeds.
So what was his reasoning? What was the core legal problem he found?
His ruling was, honestly, like a mini civics lesson. He declared the directive ultra vires.
Ultra vires. Sounds fancy. What's that mean in plain English?
It's Latin, but it means beyond the powers. Essentially, he said the executive branch just didn't have the legal authority to do this. It went beyond its constitutional power. He specifically said it violated the Constitution, particularly the spending clause.
Ah, the spending clause. That's the part that lets Congress attach strings to federal money. Yeah.
Exactly. Congress can set conditions, but, and this is the crucial part, Judge McConnell focused on those conditions have to be reasonably related to why the money's being given out in the first place.
Okay, reasonably related.
And Judge McConnell found that this immigration enforcement condition was, and I'm quoting him loosely here, not at all reasonably related to the purpose of transportation funding, which is, building and maintaining safe roads, bridges, highways, transit systems.
So it's like saying you can't demand someone paint their house blue just because you're giving them money to fix their leaky roof.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He noted the government did not cite any plausible connection between cooperating with ICE and the Transportation Department's actual congressionally approved mission.
That's a powerful finding. He wasn't just disagreeing with the policy. He was saying the process and the link were fundamentally flawed under the Constitution.
Absolutely. And his language was strong. He emphasized that letting the executive branch tack on any condition it wants to money Congress approved, even conditions entirely unrelated to the department's purpose, Well, that's just not how the three equal branches of government are allowed to operate under our Constitution.
A clear defense of the separation of powers.
Very clear. And a big reason he granted the injunction was the irreparable harm he found the states would suffer if the directive went ahead.
Right, the harm. What specific kinds of harm did he point to?
It was pretty comprehensive. First, obviously losing billions in federal funds. That alone is massive.
Catastrophic for planning, I imagine.
Definitely. But also, being forced to give up their sovereign right to decide how to use their own police force. That hits at the core of state power.
Yeah.
Then there was the risk of losing the trust built between local law enforcement and immigrant communities. If people are afraid to interact with police, it can make everyone less safe.
That's a really important point.
And finally, the practical impact. Having to scale back, reconsider, or cancel ongoing transportation projects. Real-world consequences for people's commutes, for local economies.
So it wasn't just abstract legal principles, it was about tangible impacts on states and communities.
Exactly. And, this kind of federal action wasn't happening in a vacuum. The source mentions there was already pushback against the administration's immigration policies more broadly.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, it gives this anecdote about the Los Angeles Dodgers allegedly donating $1 million to immigrant support groups and apparently telling ICE agents they weren't welcome in their parking lot. Whether that specific incident happened exactly like that or not, it sort of illustrates the climate of resistance.
Interesting. So this court case fits into a larger picture of challenges.
Definitely. And Judge McConnell's ruling wasn't some outlier. The source we looked at points out a much bigger pattern, something like over 400 cases filed against the Trump administration during its term.
400. Wow.
And over 200 rulings apparently went primarily against the administration. It suggests the courts were frequently stepping in.
It sounds like the judicial branch was working overtime. The source even mentions judges repeatedly having to sort of remind the executive branch about the basics, citing foundational cases like Marbury v. Madison from way back in 1807.
Marbury v. Madison, the case that cemented judicial review, the power of courts to strike down laws or actions they deem unconstitutional. It's like judges were saying, let's go back to Constitutional Law 101.
Okay, so stepping back, this is where it gets really fascinating, right? Especially when you think about political history.
How so?
Well, the Republican Party has historically championed states' rights, hasn't it? Limited federal government. The whole Grover Norquist wanting to shrink government small enough to drown in a bathtub idea.
Right. That was a dominant theme for decades. Less federal control, more power to the states.
But then here you had a Republican administration seemingly doing the opposite, flexing federal power, using federal funds to dictate state policy in an area, immigration, where states felt they had sovereign interests.
Exactly. The source suggests this administration showed a real preference for federal muscle, federal power, maybe even what it calls an out-of-control presidency in terms of pushing executive authority.
Which really flips the script, and it raises a big question, one the source kind of leaves hanging for us, for you, the listener. If one party uses federal power this aggressively when they're in charge.
What happens when the other party gets the presidency?
Yeah.
Do they then feel empowered to use that same federal muscle for their policy goals, maybe overriding states they disagree with? It complicates that whole traditional states' rights debate, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you think about principles versus power. But ultimately, what this deep dive shows, I think, is just how crucial the courts are in this whole system.
Yeah, the judicial branch acting as that check, upholding the Constitution, ensuring one branch doesn't just steamroll the others, or the states for that matter.
And in this case, protecting the money that was meant for, your roads, your bridges, your local transit, stopping it from being used as leverage for something totally unrelated.
So, to wrap it up, we've seen the court step in to guard that constitutional balance, specifically around federal money and state autonomy. It's a reminder that our system has these built-in guardrails, even when things get politically heated.
Right. So maybe the thought to leave you with is this. How will this balance between federal power and states' rights keep shifting? As different parties gain power, how might that affect your daily life, your community, those infrastructure projects we started with? Something to keep an eye on, for sure.